Here are the supplies that you'll need to make your sewing kit. Rather than creating a template, I thought I would give you the dimensions. The pocket part here is 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. The body of the template is 5.5 by 15 inches. And to get this round curve, I just used a roll of masking tape, or just use any type of round shape and just put it along the corners here to get you to create those curves. For the pocket portion, you will need 3 top fabrics and 3 lining. For the body of the sewing kit, you will need a top fabric, a lining fabric, and a piece of batting. I used a low loft cotton batting. I'm going to be creating an applique design on this surface, so you'll need some scrap fabric for that. And if you want to opt out on doing that, you could just use like a printed fabric or any kind of fabric that you would want, but just make sure that it's you know, a little bit heavier weight than quilting fabric. You don't want something too heavy, because you can do this by hand sewing. You will also need a piece of felt for one of the pockets, just so that you can add your needles or anything else that you might want to use. And that is 3 inches by 4.5 inches. You will also need 2 yards of bias tape. I made this myself, and this is about 1.5 inches wide. And you can use whatever kind of fabric you have. You can also use pre-made bias tape. You will also need a variety of threads. So I'm going to be using this color to do the applique stitching, this one to assemble the pouch, and then I might want to do some top stitching along the pocket here, and so that thread is for that. I haven't quite decided about that yet. You need a sewing needle and some pins. You also need a pair of scissors and snips. We're going to start with the body of the sewing kit. Place down the lining fabric, and next put down the batting fabric, and then your top fabric. Because we're putting a bias trim around the edge to finish the edge, we're not going to be turning this piece inside out. So when we work on it like this, it's going to stay like this. And my next step is I'm going to cut some shapes to place on top of here. I'm keeping the shapes fairly abstract, and I don't want to cover up that light blue fabric. I just want to kind of enhance it with some shapes. And I'm just sort of randomly kind of placing it down, not really worrying too much about the composition. And keep in mind that this is going to get turned under a little bit. So when you do place it down, it is going to shift a little bit. And you can also, you know, stitch this down and leave a raw edge as well. Whichever, you know, you find is works best for you. I'm going to play around with these shapes, and then I'm going to show you my applique process. I'm going to pin the fabric pieces down now, and if you don't want to use pins, you can use a basting stitch, which is essentially a large running stitch. But because these might shift a little bit when I turn the edges under, I find it's easier to reposition them when they're not all stitched down. But if you're not going to do that and you're going to leave it as a raw edge, then a basting stitch will work well. Make sure you pin all 3 layers. It would be nice if you wanted to try a darker thread so that you could see it. I'm going to go underneath, and then I'm going to come up and just catch a little bit of the corner of the fabric. and I'm doing the spacing about 1 centimeter apart. If you were to ask me what sort of hand sewing technique that I like the most, I would tell you that it's applique. I find this a very enjoyable process. Okay, so the edge there is held down, and I think you can sort of see the stitching on the back side. Here's my finished panel. You could see some of the shapes have changed, and that's just sort of the nature of the process. You'll find that some pieces might need to shift, or you might need to change them up completely. My next step is to add the pockets. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch these on the machine and then turn it good sides out, and then I'm going to add probably like a running stitch with that indigo thread that I have, and I will show you what I will do next after that. I went ahead and I sewed the top fabric and the lining fabric together. I did it at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I've turned it good sides out, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this indigo top thread and I'm just going to do like a simple running stitch on the top here just to give it a little bit of extra visual detail. I finished sewing the top stitching on the pockets, and before I attach the pockets to the body of the sewing kit, I'm going to attach this piece of felt. And you can attach this 2 different ways. You can either do a whip stitch or running stitch all around the edge here, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the center line and use either a running stitch or a back stitch and attach it here. That way when I put the pins and needles on here, I can just sort of lift this up, and I like the idea that it's a bit loose. And also I can put the pins in this direction or this direction, but affix this, however you feel is best. And if you find this is a little too wide, you can cut it down a little bit. What I'm going to do is attach this felt piece first, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to attach the pockets. Now there's another way that you can do this is you can cut another piece of lining and sew this with a machine onto the fabric. The only areas that need to get sewn down is this and this side, because this is at the bottom and then this will get attached when you put the bias. Personally, I think it's much better just to kind of sew this on by hand, because I found that if I add another piece of lining, it'll just kind of add weight to this, and I didn't want it to be too thick. But that is your choice, what you think is best to do. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to attach this, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to attach the pocket to the body of the sewing kit. I've pinned this down and marked the center point, and at first I was going to use the cream color thread, but I decided on using that same blue thread. That way it has a nice similar kind of detail. And just to make it much stronger, I'm going to do a back stitch. I'm going to continue the stitch until I get up to here. And make sure you leave a little bit of space, about, I would say, 3/4 of an inch. That way when you turn this under, the felt isn't right at the edge. I'm ready to attach the pockets. I'm going to have the opening of the pockets all in the same direction, so it'll be just at the top here. And like I mentioned earlier, This is going to be sewn down with the bias, so not to worry about attaching the bottom of this pocket. Here's the felt piece that I just finished sewing, and you can just sort of turn this under and then stitch it down, but I find like this is a bit bulky with the 2 layers of fabric. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this lining piece just over like this, I would say like about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to just turn it and then just mark it down with my fingernail. I'm going to take the scissors and I'm going to cut just along that edge where I marked with my nail. And by cutting a little bit of this off, it's going to make the edge of that bottom part of the pocket less bulky. And now I'm going to turn this under. And if you want to, you can press this edge if it makes it easier, or use like a hair marker, or just use your nail like what I'm doing here. In terms of placement, you need a spacing about 1/2 inch or so, about that much of a distance. And the reason why is that when this gets rolled up, if you have this too close, it's going to be hard to roll up. That way, yeah, so you want to make sure that there's a little bit of a gap there at the bottom, and then the next one would be placed in a similar position up here. I threaded the needle with the same light gray thread that I used to do the applique on the front, and I've threaded this through. What you want to do is you want to go through the layers, but you don't want to go all the way through all 3 layers because you don't want the stitching to show up on the front. And what I'm going to do is a blind stitch. So my needle is underneath that lining fabric, and then it's going to come up on the bottom of the pocket. And I'm going to do about, I would say, 1/8 of an inch or so in between. I want to keep the stitching fairly close to each other, because, you know, depending on what you want to put in your sewing kit, you want to make sure it doesn't come through the gaps. And I like to hand sew, and sewing the 2 bottom pockets is not like a lot of work for me. But like I said earlier, if you want to use a machine to sew, then you can, you know, cut another piece of lining fabric. And this is how it looks so far. So it looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and sew across the whole surface, and then I'll show you what it looks like. I've gotten to the end here. I'm just going to add 1 more stitch, and then I'm going to do a finishing knot. I'm going to create like a loop, put the needle inside the loop, and if you want to, you could do a second knot if you feel that the first one is not strong enough, but the one is fine. So this is what it looks like. It's nice and clean. I'm going to now do that for the last pocket, and then I'm going to show you how I finish it off. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew this along the edge, along this line here, and this is about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And to make sure that if you do create your own bias tape, that it is cut on a bias, because you are going around a curve, and it'll just make the fabric sit on the curve a little bit better. And part of the reason why I asked you to make the bias tape a little bit longer is because the leftover fabric I'm going to fold and then sew along that edge there, and it's going to be attached to the end of the sewing kit, and it's going to be used as your closure so that when you roll it up you have something to tie it with. I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to do that now, and make sure that when you do attach your bias tape that you kind of start on the long side. That way the ends here are a little bit nicer with a continuous piece. I've sewn on the bias tape all around the edge. So this is what it looks like on the other side. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fold this over, and then I'm going to hand stitch along this edge to hold down the flap. Here's the tie that I've stitched. I wanted to kind of mention there are two different ways that you can attach this tie. So one way is to attach it just by the one end, and what I would do is maybe cut a little bit of space here. So this is the front, the part where that curves, and in the center you can cut open the seam there and then place the end in here and then sew that back up, and then you'll have a tie that's sort of like a singular tie that you kind of wrap around. But I want to do this tie a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is fold it in half, and then the folded end I'm going to actually stitch it to the center of this bias. So I'm going to place it here in the center, open this up, and then I'm going to stitch right in the middle there at the same point where it's going to fold. And that's just how I'm going to do this tie, but you can decide which one you think is best to do. What you can also do too is, you know, fold this up and then decide where the middle point is. So if you're folding it up like this, and you're tying it here, on this back side, kind of figure out where the middle point is, and then you can also stitch it there. And then that way when you're tying it, it gets tied like at the front like this. So those are just a few options of what to do. And what I'm going to do now is stitch all this together, and then we're pretty much done. Before I go around and sew the bias, I'm going to attach the tie here with the back stitch. And you might want to do a couple of rows of stitching. So after I do this one row, I might do it again just to kind of make sure that it's on there really good, because it's gonna get tugged a lot. So I'm going back over just to really reinforce my stitching. This is what it looks like. So I've attached it, and here's the back side. Now I'm gonna finish off the edge by folding this. So you go underneath the fabric there, and then I'm just picking up a little bit of the edge of the bias tape. And I know that some people will use a sewing machine to finish this, but I always find I never do a good job, and it always looks a bit messy, and I like the way it looks hand sewn. It finishes off the edge really nicely. I'm going to go around and finish all of that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. And that's essentially the last step. The sewing kit is now all done. I finished hand stitching the binding all the way around. Here's how it looks on the front. I'm going to load up with all the different items. So I'm going to start with the pins and the needles. This is why I like making it more like a flap. I just find it easier to get my hand underneath. Add a few safety pins. Gonna load it up with all the different things. So some threads, my hair marker, little pair of snips, some fabric scraps in here, and you can hold a lot more. I just wanted to show you just a few things. And then I just kind of fold it up like this when I'm wrapping it up. And then to tie it, I'm just going to pull this on here tight and wrap this around, and then just tie it here. There you have it. There's the finished sewing kit. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.